Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Marengo Family Foundation, and these friends. This is Michael Stoller returning for the part 2 of the hospitality industry and industry in crisis with my guests Dilla Pettigara, Larry Corman, Brennan Keating, and Ben Davison. Because most of you have been involved with franchise hotels, branded hotels that you have to pay an annual revenue fee based on revenues, okay, and then you also pay a fee based on FF&E and an advertising budget. Do you believe that the national brands, in light of the world that we're in, are going to reduce their charges for these fees? I mean,
in essence, they have by the reduction in revenues.
The reduction of revenues is going to cut it down, but I'm talking about it's hard enough to operate a hotel when you're at 90% occupancy. When you're at 60% occupancy and you're still paying the expenses over there, the advertising and the other budget, it has a major effect on your bottom line. Do you think that people like Marriott and Hilton in mind and reduce their charges?
I think it's, look, a lot of these brands have longer term, contracts. I don't see them making concessions on base management or incentive fees on some of those, on in-place deals. Where we're optimistic, where we maybe can get some relief, is some of these shared services and chargebacks, where maybe on the corporate level there are some reductions, and some of the inflated marketing budgets will not be as robust, and maybe some of that will be passed on to the owners.
Have all of you or any of you applied for your hotels the PPP program?
We have, and I think it's intended for companies like ours who have really battled with our partners who have been spectacular to try and keep as many team members working as possible. So we're in that process and moving forward with that.
Ben?
Thanks to M&T.
Yeah, we're spending a lot of time on the program, and we're all for bringing our employees back and trying to get them compensated as quickly as possible. And I think there's a lot of positives about the program, but there are some nuances around forgiveness that I think still need to be worked out, particularly around, how do you bring back employees, especially when this booster for unemployment insurance of $600 that goes out 4 months is potentially more lucrative and has your employees making more money staying on unemployment. And the reality is, we're in a situation right now where it's not safe for a lot of employees to come back to work, and businesses are not reopening. So the forgiveness calculations in the PPP structure are a little bit challenging. We're hopeful that, the government, when they come out with new regs in the next sort of 48 to 72 hours, addresses the forgiveness component, maybe pushing out the 8-week start date, maybe helping with some of the 75-25 splits. But I think the structure's there where, and the spirit of trying to get employees paid and back to work is spot on, and we're optimistic that we can use the money, but at this point it's tough to take it given these couple of constraints around forgiveness.
Especially for restaurants who are told they can't open up, and even when they do open up, have to open up in small amounts. So I agree in terms of the timing, pushing that back for certain groups like restaurants.
What about the subject of, New York City has been entering a program, the mayor, with regard to putting people who were in hospitals with COVID in their hotels? That's one program. Then there's the program with regard to shelters. What do you think about all these programs that the city is trying to implement? And I assume they're trying to do it in Georgia and also in Philadelphia.
I think it's great that they're doing it, that the governments and the hotels are working together. There's a lot of hotels that have that space. I know both Four Seasons in New York have been above and beyond. We're trying to work in our own way through one of our partners, our majority partner, in helping NYPD. We're working with a lot of healthcare professionals. We're working with another group through the state that I can't talk about, but I think everybody first looks at their partners, their team, their residents, and the community. And I think everybody has really rallied around their communities and tried to step up in ways in which they can.
There are a number of luxury hotels planned to open up in New York City, including the Virgin, and there was an article written about Richard Branson and financial difficulties. I believe that certain of these hotels, which were luxury brands, will open, or they will change to be more of a limited service because there's not really the need, or people want the luxury brands more than the limited service.
I mean, I completely agree with that. I think there's going to be, again, this rush to quality because so much is going to be managing expectation, managing perception. People are going to be fearful for a while. It may change. It may, as Ian Schrager said, go right back to the way it was. And I'm hoping there's a balance to that. But I think there will be this push to quality with respect to cleanliness and security and comfort and value.
A significant portion of hotel revenue in many cases is dependent on catering and events. Ben, Gramercy Park Hotel, a lot of people would have weddings over there because it was a beautiful place. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen with the situation. Where do you see it?
Obviously a lot of these are forward bookings, right? So we're working with all these groups to try and reschedule and try and book for later on when we have more clarity on what type of events are allowed. But I think it's certainly going to be some challenges, going forward. I think the catering business will probably be okay. I mean, the bigger problem you're going to have is a lot of these big group boxes that are so dependent on banquets and group business. It's going to be harder to ramp up. These are things that are booked 6 to 12 months out, and we don't know what the government regulations are going to be around social distancing and capacity concerns. So I think it's just going to be an added stress for some of these big box and group focused hotels to reopen.
There have been a number of airport hotels, like the one that you're doing, Philip, in Aurora, is right near the airport. Okay, and then there are numerous hotels at the airports in the city and other places, especially even in Philadelphia. What effects with the limited travel do you think it's going to have on the airport hotels?
Single digit occupancy, 10%. Maybe they're still getting some of the airline crew business if they were serving that. But that was always lower rated business anyway. It's going to be a challenge. I mean, but they're all operating at bare bones. And these properties tended to be, a little bit more full service, if you will, if not fully full service, but, have more of the amenity offerings, maybe a restaurant on site or a bar. And that's impacted, those various lines of cash flow that's all contributed to the hotel. So it's going to be a long road, for them, just like it is going to be for, the airlines, during a recovery.
What about the OTA business? Do you think the Expedia, the Pricelines, are still going to be a major benefactor to you, or are people going to go direct?
Because we are more quality of individuals for longer length stays. So we've always been a little bit more self-sufficient and a little less dependent on OTAs. I think they're exorbitant. I think they're primarily for daily business. That's not who we are. We're a blend between hotel, condo, apartment. But I think you're going to see some competition coming from Airbnb towards them. I think you're going to see the whole segment reduce their fees a little because it is exorbitant.
Do you see the roles of alternative lenders increasing in the hospitality market? Because banks may be staying close to the vest in today's world?
I think, yes. I mean, certainly I think everyone's going to be cautious, and certainly we don't know what the recovery is going to look like and how long this is going to be and what that uphill, climb is going to be. But I think as banks, traditional banks pull back, non-banks will see an opportunity, and they provided that the remainder of their portfolio remains healthy enough, then they'll be able to accommodate some of that demand. It'll be, again, probably higher rates, lower leverage, and certainly the more attractive projects or assets that they historically may not have been competitive in being able to obtain because they didn't have access to the bank cost of funds.
I think some of those alternative lenders may have portfolios that are stressed right now, though, too, because they weren't going in and they were coming in on transactions with higher leverage, a lot of times non-recourse, and then in many cases levering those loan portfolios too. So there's gonna be calls on, there may be margin calls for some of those groups. So there'll be some that'll be fine, but I think that some of the lenders in that space are under even more pressure than the banks are right now.
Significant number of people, like 67 million people, came to New York last year. Needless to say, the number of people are going to drop. A large number of them went to Times Square, where Larry, you have a property, and Ben, you have a property. How much effect is this going to have on the Times Square, all of the hotels in general?
I think Times Square has certainly already had some rate issues in terms of trying to drive occupancy levels. New York's a crowded place no matter where you are. I don't think Times Square is going to have such a crazy drop in occupancy that people are going to avoid it. I mean, I do think there's going to be a ramp up with the theater business, given it hasn't reopened, and there might be some demand drivers in Times Square that lag a little bit. But I think ultimately, if travel restarts, people are going to want to come to New York for New York, and I think that includes being in Times Square.
From our perspective, I think just as international travel isn't coming to New York, domestic travel isn't going to these other international destinations. So we're really focusing on domestic travel, and we're taking it quarter by quarter. So this summer, Broadway is going to be back by mid-June. That should certainly help Times Square. We generally have people who are on the playbills, who are in the theater, the directors, executives, the stars, staying with us on a longer length stay. But as Ben said, the ADRs have never been great in Times Square per se. But I think all of New York's going to look for different segments to attract back, whether it's for a couple days or for several weeks or several months, which is the sliver that we go after.
So where do you see, in summation, before we close, where are the opportunities going to be in the hospitality industry in the next 12 to 18 months? If we open up in June or everything else, where would you want to be? What do you think are the best approaches for each approach? Philip?
As a lender, I think we're going to have an opportunity to, again, attach to certain projects at, lower leverage points, certainly higher, rates than maybe we saw pre-COVID, and be able to benefit from more attractive projects. And I think that, those opportunities will exist. I think that we are going to see, as someone else mentioned, that some hotels may not open again. So, this supply creep, new starts will have stock, but then even the existing supply, I think that, we'll be able to see better and healthier return to occupancy over time. I think the biggest thing will be people getting over, their concern for the travel, and then the fear associated with the virus itself. But I think that once that is overcome, then I think that, the industry is probably going to be a little bit better off long term. And I think we all share, the same optimism for the long term prospects and success here.
Ben, since you were the one who brought up the fact that you believe certain hotels are going to close, what percentage do you think are going to close in the metropolitan area? If you had to make a guess, 10%?
Now, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a 10 to 20% closure. I think a lot of assets that were having some trouble or maybe don't reopen, and maybe some get forced for alternative uses, which I think overall will help the recovery here.
When you say alternative uses, do you think we're going to do like we had 20 years ago, a lot of hotels being converted to condominiums? Or rentals?
I mean, look, I don't know if condominiums given the market, but look, I think you're going to see some converted to office. I think you're going to see some of the Lexington Avenue, corridor, a lot of these big box hotels that have already closed, maybe get knocked down and eventually get converted to office. I mean, maybe there's a shift at some point to some micro residential where, as people are continuing to have, be priced out of the city. But I do think that there's going to be some significant closures, and I think assets that are high quality, mainly more leisure focused, there's going to be, a lot of growth in New York, and maybe, some of the closures will fix the supply issue that New York had and help it rebound even faster.
With what you just said is very important about the Lexington Avenue properties, because the Lexington Avenue properties are in the Midtown rezoning. So if you took down one of these properties, and it's much easier than taking down an office building where you have to buy out the tenants. Here you don't have tenants, so you have an easier accessibility, and you can increase the size, which is a good example of what they were planning for the Grand Hyatt anyway. So this could be helping increase different types of properties opening up in the Grand Central neighborhood. Larry?
We're going to champion the basics, really stick to our knitting, and internally we're trying to really reduce expenses, get a little bit more frugal, really try and do away with dining dailies, which we weren't doing much of, but really be smart how we build for it. Externally, we want to communicate to a new group. We want to connect with the new group and really get out there our dedication to cleanliness, some of the new policies we're doing to really meet those needs and for them to hear what they're looking for so that they feel comfortable not only traveling but staying with us. Even a little thing, we're going to have a sleep mask when they come in for while they're in AK, and then a mask they can wear out branded when they're outside of AK. So continuing to bring that calm from their chaos.
The AKA vodka and the AKA Chardonnay, there's going to be AKA masks.
Yeah, we've shifted the AVOD and AVIN to an AK Cares package, which has a lot of things they'll want. We're adding apps so the call buttons for the elevators can come. So it's really going to be geared towards subtle shifts, reducing expenses, shuttle shifts to really having those elements that resonate with today's customer for the next 12 to 18 months.
And now I go to the man who has the money. Where do you see the opportunities and changes?
I mean, the opportunities, I like Larry's comment to kind of back to basics. I mean, we're going to be looking at kind of supporting our existing customers, the ones we've had long-term relationships with, and really cementing those relationships where there may be kind of, pieces of business that we aren't covering with them currently. And then there's, a list of a couple probably prospects that we're looking to probably bring into the bank. And we're going to probably try to support those folks, over the next 12 to 18 months. A lot of my strongest relationships have been developed during times like this. I mean, a lot of our hotel business kind of came from, the strength of that came, during the crisis in 2009 and 10. So the way we acted during that time allowed us to build up the portfolio that we've enjoyed over the last decade. And we're going to be kind of reinforcing those relationships again over the next year and a half.
I think, as we saw from 9/11, as we saw from the 2008 recession, New York and the nation is resilient. We will overcome this. I'd like to thank Brennan, Larry, Dillip, and Ben, and see you at our next webinar produced by AmTrust Title, Stephen Napolitano. And thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.